I told him the aircraft didn't exist. 3 days later, Captain Robert Hayes watched it break the sound barrier over the Nevada desert, piloted by a man who wasn't supposed to be alive. August 1945. The war had just ended, but Hayes didn't feel like celebrating. He stood inside a converted warehouse in San Diego, staring at something that made his engineering degree feel worthless. The Japanese jet sat under harsh work lights, its sleek body covered in strange markings and battle scars. No propeller, no visible means of thrust that made sense to him. Just smooth metal curves that looked more like a sculpture than a weapon. The smell hit him first. Burnt rubber mixed with something chemical he couldn't identify. Oil pooled beneath the fuselage, dark and thick. Hayes had been around aircraft his entire adult life. He knew what a plane should look like, how it should sound, what made it stay in the sky. This thing violated every principle he'd learned. A colonel walked up beside him, hands clasped behind his back. The man's face was stone, but his eyes betrayed something else. Fear, maybe, or respect for an enemy that had built something this advanced while their cities burned. The jet had been discovered 3 weeks earlier on a hidden airstrip outside Tokyo. Intelligence said it was part of a program called Kikka. The translation came back simple enough: orange blossom. Hayes thought that was a strange name for something designed to kill, but then again, the Japanese had a way of making death sound beautiful. What bothered him most was the cockpit. They'd found it sealed shut, the pilot still strapped inside. When the recovery team finally pried it open, the man was unconscious but breathing, severely dehydrated, half-starved but alive. He'd been in there for 6 days, with no food, rationing a single canteen of water. Waiting. For what, nobody knew. Hayes ran his hand along the wing, cold metal, smoother than anything American factories were producing. No rivets where there should be rivets. No seams where panels should connect. It was like the entire aircraft had been poured from a single mold. Impossible, his brain kept saying. But here it was. The pilot was being held in a medical facility downtown. Captain Takeo Yamashita, 26 years old, trained at the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service Academy. His file was thin, mostly blanks and redacted sections. What they did know was that he'd been ordered to destroy the prototype before Allied forces arrived. Instead, he'd hidden it, protected it, nearly died doing so. Hayes couldn't stop thinking about that. The war was over. Japan had surrendered. What kind of man risks everything to save a machine for an enemy that defeated him? The colonel spoke without looking at him. The jet was being transferred to a classified facility in Nevada within 48 hours. Hayes would be part of the team attempting to fly it. No pressure, the colonel said, but this was the most important assignment of his career. Maybe of any American pilot's career. That night, Hayes couldn't sleep. He kept seeing that cockpit in his mind. The pilot's hands cracked and bloody from trying to manually override controls. The empty water canteen on the floor. The photograph tucked into the control panel. A woman and a small child both smiling. The next morning, against direct orders, Hayes visited the medical facility. Yamashita was awake, sitting upright in a hospital bed staring out the window. His face was gaunt, bruised, but his eyes were sharp, alert. When Hayes entered, the Japanese pilot didn't flinch, didn't speak, just watched him with an expression Hayes couldn't read. Hayes pulled up a chair. He didn't know what he expected, defiance maybe, or hatred. Instead, Yamashita reached for a notepad on the bedside table. His English was broken, but clear enough. 3 words, written carefully. You will crash. Hayes felt his pulse quicken. The pilot continued writing, his hand steady despite obvious weakness. Engine needs 2 minutes warm. Throttle too fast, fuel line freeze. Left aileron pulls hard at high speed. Trim tab broken since April. Yamashita looked up, and for the first time, Hayes saw something human in his expression. Not anger, not surrender, something closer to grief. I fix for 3 months. No parts, no help, only me. The photograph from the cockpit sat on the windowsill now, propped against a water glass. Hayes understood then, this wasn't about loyalty to an emperor or an empire. This was about creation, about building something beautiful in a world burning itself to ash, about leaving behind proof that you existed, that you made something that mattered. Yamashita wrote one more line before setting the pen down. Flies like dream, but dreams can kill you. 2 days later, Hayes stood on a Nevada airstrip at dawn, the jet gleaming in the early light. His hand rested on the throttle. The engine hummed beneath him, a sound unlike anything he'd ever heard. Smooth, almost alive. In his pocket, folded carefully, was a list of handwritten notes, instructions from an enemy who'd become something entirely different. He pushed the throttle forward, remembering to wait. 2 minutes. The temperature gauge climbed. His heart hammered against his ribs. And then, the jet moved.
The acceleration didn't feel real. Hayes had flown everything the Army Air Forces could throw at him. P-51s, P-38s, even experimental propeller designs that shook themselves apart at top speed. Nothing prepared him for this. The jet didn't roar. It screamed. A high-pitched wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once, like the air itself was tearing open. The runway blurred beneath him, and suddenly he was airborne, climbing at an angle that would have stalled any conventional aircraft. But this wasn't conventional. This was something beyond the war, beyond the technology that had killed millions. This was the future, and it was terrifying. The Nevada desert spread out below him, endless brown and tan, stretching to mountains that looked like teeth against the horizon. Hayes kept one eye on the instruments, the other on Yamashita's notes clipped to the control panel. The handwriting was precise, almost artistic, each instruction accompanied by a small diagram. At 8,000 feet, the left aileron pulled hard, exactly as warned. Hayes compensated, feeling the aircraft fight him for a moment before settling. His hands were sweating inside his flight gloves. The cockpit smelled like hot metal and that same unidentifiable chemical from the hangar. Outside, the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. He'd been briefed by a team of engineers before takeoff. They'd spend 3 weeks examining every inch of the jet, running calculations, building theories. In the end, they'd admitted they didn't fully understand how it worked. The engine design was years ahead of anything in American development. The fuel mixture was unstable, dangerous. The entire aircraft should have been a death trap. But Yamashita had kept it alive, alone, with no support, while his country collapsed around him. Hayes pushed the throttle further. The speed gauge climbed past anything he'd ever seen. 400 miles per hour, then 450, then 500. The airframe vibrated but held together. Outside, the world became abstract. Details disappeared into speed and distance. He thought about the pilot sitting in that hospital bed, writing instructions for the enemy, teaching him how to fly his dream. There was something profound in that gesture, something that transcended the uniforms and flags and all the reasons men had killed each other for 4 years. The radio crackled. Ground control wanted him to return. They'd seen enough. The test was successful. But Hayes wasn't ready. Not yet. He needed to know what this machine could really do, what Yamashita had really built. He climbed higher, 10,000 feet, 12,000. The air thinned, grew colder. Ice formed at the edges of the canopy. The engine never faltered, just that smooth, relentless scream, pushing him faster, higher, further than any aircraft had a right to go. At 15,000 feet, Hayes leveled off and opened the throttle completely. The jet surged forward. The speed gauge needle swept past 600 miles per hour. The controls went light in his hands, almost floating. He was no longer flying. He was being carried by something primal, like riding a lightning bolt through heaven. And then he heard it. A sound he'd never heard before, never imagined. A deep, reverberating boom that seemed to come from inside his chest. The aircraft shuddered once violently, then smoothed out. The world outside changed. Everything became sharper, clearer. The mountains looked closer. The sky looked darker. Hayes glanced at the instruments. 650 miles per hour. Impossible. Nothing could fly that fast. The human body couldn't withstand that speed. But here he was, breathing normally, feeling alive in a way he'd never felt on the ground. He had broken the sound barrier. Not officially, that wouldn't come for 2 more years, in a different aircraft, with a different pilot getting the credit. But in this moment, in this stolen Japanese jet built by a man who refused to let his creation die, Hayes had touched something beyond war, beyond nations and enemies and all the machinery of death that had consumed the world. He brought the jet down slowly, carefully, following every instruction Yamashita had written. The landing was rough but controlled. When the wheels touched Nevada sand, Hayes sat in the cockpit for a long time, hands shaking, unable to move. They debriefed him for 6 hours, asked him the same questions different ways, measured his reactions, took notes on clipboards they wouldn't let him see. The colonel was there, stone-faced as always, but Hayes caught something in the man's expression. Respect, maybe, or envy. That evening, Hayes drove back to the medical facility. Yamashita was standing by the window, one hand pressed against the glass. He turned when Hayes entered, and the question was written all over his face before Hayes could speak. Hayes nodded once, just once. The Japanese pilot's shoulders sagged, not from sadness, Hayes realized, but from relief. The kind of relief that comes when you've carried something heavy for so long you forgot what it felt like to put it down. Yamashita wrote slowly this time, his hand trembling. How fast? Hayes told him. 650 miles per hour, stable flight, no structural failure, perfect control at speeds that should have killed him. Yamashita closed his eyes. A tear ran down his cheek, just one, quickly wiped away. When he opened his eyes again, they were clear, focused. He wrote one final message, then handed the notepad to Hayes. War makes us build machines to destroy, but sometimes, if you are lucky, you build something that survives the war, something that proves we are more than the worst things we do. Hayes left the facility as the sun set over San Diego. The sky was orange and pink, colors that reminded him of the jet's name, Orange Blossom, beauty growing from destruction. The aircraft would be dismantled within a month, its secrets absorbed into American jet programs that would dominate the skies for decades. Yamashita would be repatriated to Japan, where he'd live quietly until his death in 1987, never speaking publicly about what he'd built. But on that August evening in 1945, 2 men from opposite sides of a finished war understood something that transcended victory and defeat. They'd touched the future together, and for one brief, impossible moment, flying faster than sound itself, the past didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was the dream, and the dream could fly.